Welcome to Upper Pylon 2. Our mission is to provide you with an in-depth review of every episode of DS9 in the order they were broadcast. Tonight's episode is Rapture, and this is Matt in Buffalo.
And this is Dan from Long Island.
And this is Matt from Arizona, and you are cleared for docking. It is just the three of us tonight, and we are taking a look at a very, very spiritual episode of Deep Space Nine, Rapture. So let's get right into it. Synopsis. Ben Sisko experiences visions of things to come. This is the 10th episode of Season 5. It was first aired, on December 30th, 1996. Written by Hans Beimler, directed by Jonathan West. Guest stars this week include Penny Johnson as Cassidy Yates, Ernest Perry Jr. as Charlie Watley, and Louise Fletcher, of course, as Kai Wynn. Matt has the notes this week, so Matt, whenever you're ready, make us raptured.
Teaser. We open on a tight shot of a tiny little itty-bitty painting of an ancient Bajoran mythical city. But who cares about all that? The important thing to come out of this episode is they're in the first contact uniforms, save for Sisko, who's in a very ill-fitting mess of a uniform. Let's be honest here. They explain that this painting is of a lost city that has been lost for millennia. But there are some clues to its location in a spire located in the middle of the city in the painting. Sisko is captivated by this mystery and wants to investigate it further. And he's backed up by a prophecy that says somebody like the emissary with close ties to the prophets will be able to find the city. And Sisko is off to a strong start by figuring out that the writing on the third of the four sides of the spire is there in a reflection in a waterfall. So he's off to the holosuites to do a bit of investigation. And as a little aside, boy, do I love it when they go off to the holodecks or holosuites to do these, add this thing to it. Oh, that's so cool.
So you're saying one could say that Sisko's gone chasing waterfalls?
Quark arrives and points out that he's been there all night working on this mystery. And then Sisko tries to save the program to call it a night when the control station bursts and he is blasted. Cut to the opening credits. Yes, Matt.
Come
Chasing
on.
Waterfalls.
Yes. It's 1996. It's 2 years after TLC. I had to make that joke.
Sure you did. But seriously, say what you will about the prophecies and all that stuff, what it forebodes. It's very demeaning to the writing and everything in this episode to say the biggest thing from this is the uniforms and that this feels like that's it. This is the final matured Deep Space Nine. And this is just the final bit of the show now. We're in the closing stretches. We're 2.5 years left to go, but this is the final stretch of the show.
Well, for the most part, I guess the real final stretch is when we exit Jadzia and enter Ezri, but that's about it.
Well, I like that the first order of business with the new uniform was for Sisko to go all Indiana Jones and find the lost city of Bahala, and recreate the map room on the holodeck.
It's a very minor thing, but since we're talking about the uniforms, Matt, you should probably mention the behind the scenes now. Sisko's uniform is so distracting this whole episode, and it's not that I ding the episode for it, but wow, is it kind of an eyesore to look at the way he wears it.
Yeah, the badge, the communicator badge is in the wrong part of the uniform. He's wearing it up in the gray shoulder pads part. It's located on the correct part of his anatomy, but because he's wearing such an ill-fitting costume, that the shoulders kind of roll forward on it, I think. And you see it. They rightfully take him out of that and have him in the undervest for big chunks of the show, like where Picard gets to business to go kill the Borg Queen. Yeah. So I think they didn't have enough uniforms and had to actually take like Jonathan Frakes or something like that from First Contact and put him on it. And it just looks messy.
Yeah, which, I don't get, because, it's not like they didn't know that this uniform change was coming.
It's not like they don't have a good tailor on the station.
Ooh.
But
very fair point.
But he just got out of prison, so.
Yeah, Sisko might not be going to ask him to do any favors. But it is funny. I remember watching this episode, waiting for the new uniforms and being very excited when the first shot after the tight image of the painting is them in these uniforms. And I was excited because I would have been just back from First Contact because they timed the release of this, right, to coincide with most people seeing that.
December 30th, so it's a few weeks after First Contact because I think First Contact came out at Thanksgiving, and so this is about a month later.
Still, good timing.
Yeah, and I mean, aside from Cisco's, I mean, this is my favorite version of the Prime Universe uniform so far. I really like the gray on black. It looks good.
It looks particularly great on Jadzia. Just the shoulders and the way she carries it and her cut, for some reason she just looks super professional in it.
I think it's because I don't know if it's entirely because of this, but it's because Terry Farrell is so tall. She wears the uniform well on her figure.
But she totally carries it off as that's a believable uniform.
Yeah.
You know, it just looks very real. It upscales the budget and the feel of the show. It's not that weird season 1 and 2 next gen kind of zip up things that just felt cheesy. This is like, it is movie quality stuff.
Yeah, the original DS9 Voyager zip up jumpsuit thing always reminds me of like when Geordi has to go in the conduits and puts his coverall on. You know, sort of like we do dirty work here on the dirty station.
Yeah, these ones I think they kind of reflect the times of in universe, right? Because things are starting to get a little bit darker. They're starting to get a little bit more militaristic because we're building up to this huge war that's going to happen at the end of this season.
So, speaking of the war, why don't we get into the prophecies of that? Now, in Act 1, you know how it works. We have a clip to get some of that pesky exposition out of the way.
You said yourself the captain's all right.
Lucky for you.
Then why am I being arrested? I already told you it was an accident, a minor technical difficulty. You can't arrest someone for a minor technical difficulty.
No, but I can arrest you for negligence. Your own records show your hollow suites are in desperate need of maintenance.
Which is what I've been telling Chief O'Brien for the past week. I begged him to have Rom fix them, but you know what he said? Rom's too busy upgrading the sensor array. Can you believe that? Anyone can fix the sensor array, but no one can fix the hollow suites like that idiot brother of mine. So, you see, if anyone should be arrested for negligence, it's Chief O'Brien.
Tell it to the magistrate.
Whoops. No exposition there. I got the comedy scene instead. I like that scene, and Quark does it a couple times in this episode where he's not in it much, but he's the scene stealer.
Yeah, he is for sure. He's got a great case for negligence against him. Just saying, having taken torts last year.
But you got to appreciate the Ferengi-esque weasel out ability of throw the blame on O'Brien instead. It ain't going to work, but hey, credit to him for that.
Well, I don't know why it shouldn't work because O'Brien is in charge of making sure the whole station runs correctly.
True, but we all know the bias that the Ferengi have against them.
Yeah.
That's not going to fly.
There's also the whole bit where like they never charge him for anything, so it's not like they can claim, well, you weren't paying your bills, so therefore we didn't come perform the maintenance. It's really just the onus is on the station to come do the maintenance.
Yeah.
Ooh, a couple pro-Quark lawyers here working pro bono for him.
I mean, it's a standard landlord agreement.
All right. Well, I mean, we can keep going into this argument
Brian
if we
finds
want.
himself in an actionable position.
Oh, Lord. Anyhow, the real exposition that went on was by Bashir, basically saying that Cisco's neurons are now in super duper mode for the next few days. He'll be basically experiencing everything with a nice mellow buzz. No worries.
Of course, he throws in the line about, does my uniform look any different to you?
Yeah, that was a nice little bit of wink wink kind of stuff. Again, they're fairly clever when they do these things usually. That night, over dinner, Jake mentions that Cassidy is going to be back on station after her stay in the clink, and that their relationship should be revisited. But Ben is distracted. You see, he's busy ripping off or making an homage to Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yep.
He's making the fourth side symbols of the spire in his food. He's all excited by this, and he runs off to the Hollow Suite once again. And while making the spire, he gets a call from Admiral Charles Watley, a nice one-off character that I actually rather liked him this week.
Yeah, for one of the few times in a long time we don't get a. He's not a badmiral. He's actually like just a dedicated officer.
Dedicated officer, and every time he makes an argument, he's absolutely he's absolutely right. And it's a tiny little thing later, but when Jake says go ahead and do the surgery to save Ben's life, as they walk out in the back, you just see this admiral comforting Jake just a little bit as they walk away. And who knows if that's direction, if that's written, or if that's the actor doing it himself, but it's buried in the back of the scene, and it's nice. I would have liked to have seen this admiral a little bit more.
Yeah. We get some better admiral characters this coming soon. I mean, like next season, we're going to get introduced to Ross, who's, not always a sign of virtue, but really a great character. I like him a lot.
Yeah, and it's not that I need to have super great continuity in admirals. Obviously, there's going to be a bunch, but this is a guy I could have had him carry through for Ross and been pretty happy with it.
Oh, for sure. I mean, like I said, he's one of the few admirals who's not an ass. I mean, he's not a Leighton or a Nechayev.
Right. And you're so programmed to think that they are.
I think Dan was trying to say something, but he's muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I have to chime in and just say I did find him to be a bit off-putting. I would never be willing to trade Ross for this guy. I just found him to be the antagonist of the week from, upstairs in the office.
Now, I'm going to ask, I was just going to make the point that I think we're programmed to think that is the case for most of these admirals. So he's going to come in and you're naturally going to go, oh, how's this guy going to ruin our fun for our characters? I kind of actually fought against that, and I'm like, no, this guy is okay. So it's like, where are the, antagonist qualities to him here that you saw?
Well, I mean, the first example that springs to my mind, which is jumping ahead a little bit, is when Sisko actually finds Bahala, courtesy of his euphoric visions or whatever it is that the Admiral had already been kind of dismissive of. And instead of just being like, wow, this is amazing, he kind of was like saying, wow, this is amazing, Ben, but we have a meeting back on the station and this is kind of getting in the way. So can we ditch all this spiritual nonsense and go sign a treaty?
Yeah, but I mean, he's still a chain of command. He's got to do his job.
That and now we're going to pile up and defend him. To his credit, then Ben pushes back and Watley goes, you're right. Here, have your one night here. But I am still legit concerned. We have a huge political machine going ahead, and we have to address that. So we're going to let you have your fun here, play the role of the emissary, but we still have you playing the role of, the captain of the station that you have to fulfill too. So he's giving him a lot of leeway.
And let's not forget, like this, the type of job they're talking about in this episode. This is what Sisko was originally sent for. That's what Picard tells him in the first episode. Is his job is to do everything short of violating the Prime Directive to get Bajor into the Federation.
Yeah, and the agenda of the Admiral is totally on point. His priorities are totally on point. But just the fact that even in the moment of standing in this ancient city, this miraculous discovery, he's like annoyed by it. I feel like Ben, it's really neat that you found this city. It's really neat that you're apparently the Messiah to these people. But can we go back upstairs and do some work?
See, what you read as annoyance, I read as hesitance on Starfleet's part, because it's gotta not sit very comfortably with them that one of their officers, probably one of their most important officers, is considered to be this religious messiah by this culture. And the more that he acts in that role, the more and more uncomfortable it gets for them. Not that they're dismissive of his role, but it's just like, that's a hard position to be in.
It is.
Yeah.
But they also learned what happened in Ascension when he gave it up. You
Oh,
know?
I know, but it's still like, I mean, how do you toe that line is very difficult for, I'm sure, the hires up. And I mean, he's not dismissive of it. He would just rather focus on the stuff that he does know how to do.
Yeah, I think he's getting, and this is him getting uncomfortable with the balance between his duty as a Starfleet officer and this religious figure. And he is seeing that tipping point maybe going over too far in a direction the Federation has not and will continue not to be comfortable with. And we see what the effect of him having that balance go too far, cutting way ahead to right at the end. Wiley all but says, "You be gone right now." What you did if it wasn't for the religious angle. I mean, that's the heavy implication. Is like,
well, yeah,
I would have your head.
Yeah, the only reason he's not getting court-martialed, I think, is because if they removed him, then Bajor will never join the Federation.
Right. So this is the manifestation of him being uncomfortable with that. Seeing he rightfully looked down the path and saw what was going to happen. And for him, I mean, I don't know if you can really be too upset with him being worried about that. From an outside perspective, he's looking at a guy getting into potential mysticism, of another culture. And
I just want to draw this distinction. I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong, Dan, but what I'm saying is, to me, he doesn't come off like a Nechayev, where, Nechayev, like, not only will stick it to you, but she'll purposefully assign people to very uncomfortable positions. Like, yes, let's send this former Bajoran refugee to go infiltrate the Maquis. I'm sure she'll be just fine with that.
Yeah, she wouldn't have given, Nechayev would not have let him stay that one night, I think. Right. She would just go, "That's it. You're done. Come back to the station now."
Yeah. I mean, well, Nechayev was a cartoon antagonist,
Right.
I mean, there's never anything serious to her character. But I agree with all the points you guys have made pretty much. I guess just on sort of an emotional level, just my gut reaction to the guy, I didn't like him. And maybe it's just because I felt like he was playing an antagonist role to my captain. And I just didn't appreciate it in the moment. But again, all reasonable agendas on his part, given his position, given the situation.
And, I mean, maybe I'm coming at it from a different angle too, because I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but, I kind of feel a little gray on Sisko in this episode. I think that he steps really into selfishness during some of this experience. So I kind of saw the Admiral as the good guy.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And it's kind of the same argument I make frequently when it comes to Keiko O'Brien. We have our fantastical characters off on their adventures, and when a real world type person comes in and goes, "Oh, this is a little weird. Maybe we shouldn't go down this path." It's like pump the brakes on the fun, and people, I don't think, like those characters, because I want to see my, characters have adventures and stuff like that. So I suspect there's a little bit of that working against him.
Well, who gets some really interesting character development this episode is Kai Wynn, but we haven't gotten to her yet, so let's get towards her.
Right, and we certainly will, because I wanted that to be a bit of a focus on discussions as well. So back to that Admiral. He calls Sisko while he is in the holosuite and has some very good news. The Admiral says that, hey, the Bajoran application to enter the Federation has finally been approved, and that the signing ceremony is going to take place on the station, not because of budgetary constraints, because of all the good work that the station did. And cut to a celebration in Quark's bar. He, for example, is overjoyed because this is going to mean a lot of business coming in. Kira's emotions, however, are a bit more complex, and we have that in another short clip.
Enjoying the celebration? As far as I'm concerned, Starfleet should accept a new member every week.
And you, Major, are you celebrating?
5 years ago, I wouldn't have been. I didn't think Federation membership was right for Bajor. It hadn't been that long since the occupation. I thought it was important for us to learn to stand on our own 2 feet.
And what changed your mind?
A lot of things. My time on the station, my dealings with Starfleet, but mostly the captain. He can be very persuasive. No doubt about it. They made me a believer. Well, I'll agree to that. Here is the captain. I'd like to congratulate him. Well, he was here for a little while, but I think he went back to the holosuite.
Don't worry, I fixed it.
Captain.
And with that, Kira enters the holosuite to find the captain in a trance in front of the spire. Commercial break. So let's go back to that clip a little bit. I really liked Kira's kind of complex emotions there. She's happy, but this is obviously a very important transitional period for her people and the planet. And then the whole religious thing about the captain. It's all just, it's played very nice and maybe not necessarily in a direction you would admit, just think right off the bat she'd be happy, overjoyed, or angry. It's a lot more complex and layered than just simple emotions like that.
Well, it's a big life change for, her people. And I like what it does. It shows for her character personally, because we all remember where she started. Yeah, very antagonistic, did not want the Federation there. The fact that she's even feeling any kind of positive feelings toward this is big character change for her.
Yeah, it provides also a nice sort of transitional stepping stone between the positions of like a Kai Wynn and the Federation brass, where it's like, this is great or this is terrible. And Kira has the more nuanced position of, it's been a long road, but I think we're at a point where this really is the right thing to do, but it's not just a given.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. I like the fact that, had this gone through, it won't by the end of this episode, but had this gone through, it took them 5 years to get their act together. That to me is more realistic than having it happen in like season 2.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just one other little point from her, or for her. This whole time she's worn that, again, I make this point, they've done now a couple of episodes where they talk about the importance of the uniforms that they put on. She's been wearing this uniform, indicating that she's fighting for her people all this time. Obviously not always in it as a terrorist freedom fighter or what have you, but now she's going to have to give up that uniform and put on the Starfleet one and fight for other people, presumably.
Which, incidentally, she looks good in when we get to the 7th season. But
she looks fantastic in it. But we don't follow that line of thought in this episode, but that's probably something going through in her head as well, leading to these very complex things. I don't know. It's like a throwaway 1-minute scene with a comedy punchline by Quark at the end, but she played it really well, and there's just a lot unsaid in there. That's great.
I mean, this is a big thing that's going to affect the station, too, because up until this point, it's Bajoran-owned, administrated by Starfleet. If Bajor joins the Federation, then the station becomes a Federation station, period.
Yeah, and it's not even a given that she stays there.
Right. That's the other thing, too. It's like, once if the militia gets absorbed into Starfleet, people who are happy with their ground-based assignments may find themselves reassigned to starships, and they may not necessarily want to be reassigned to starships. Yeah.
So it's ultimately a good thing, but good things have other effects, and it's a scene that so many people will miss, but I just kind of locked in on it and really, really liked her. The whole implication of it.
It's good to see, bar talk, how is this big event affecting, not the little people, quote unquote, but it's something that you could imagine that everybody's talking about in the bar.
Oh, absolutely. So in Act 2, Kira manages to shake Sisko awake, and he snaps out of it. He says he was having visions of being in that mythical city of Bahala. Kira ends up feeling a bit guilty as she woke him up during one of his spiritual visions. But Sisko downplays that. And just then, there's a lot of talk about dark clouds of locusts in this episode, but we get a different dark cloud as Kai Wynn arrives on the station. Sisko shirks his duty to have to go meet with her and sends Kira to annoy her instead. He's going to stick along with this mystery and investigate that further. And next, I have a clip of Kira's meeting with Wynn, and I just want to point out, please do focus and watch for all the alternative meaning to every single line these two people say to each other. It is just great.
Yeah, it's very nuanced. Let's listen.
Kylo, greetings, my child. You look very sweet.
Looks can be deceiving, but you don't need me to tell you that.
Why isn't the emissary here to greet me?
I'm afraid Captain Sisko's busy at the moment.
Still basking in the adulation of Starfleet Command.
Something like that.
I'm sure the Federation is very pleased with the job he's done.
I thought everyone was.
Well, not everyone. You know, our culture has had only 5 short years to recover from the occupation. Only 5 years of freedom. It hardly seems enough time, does it?
Well, Bajor's still going to be free. Joining the Federation isn't going to change that.
I see working beside Captain Sisko all these years has had quite an influence on you.
I have to give you credit. You just never give up. I'm sure the emissary will consider everything you have to say, and then Bajor's admittance can go forward, unobstructed.
I await the will of the prophets.
Oh, the hate between the two, and that is just delicious. Right? I mean, every bit they say is just snark at the other.
Oh, it's filled with animosity.
Oh, every single little bit of it.
I mean, I was watching everybody's reactions, and Dan, you had a particular chuckle when Kai Wynn steps off and says that Kira looks sweet.
Yes, and I will read you my note. You look very sweet equals you're a little whore.
And it's the little.
Where is your husband? Oh, you don't have one child.
Well, it's not just that too. I took it like when she first. Oh, it's Major Kiro. Why are you greeting me? And where's the captain?
Didn't she actually look down at her belly and be like, "Don't you look sweet?"
Yeah, with that little telling pause. If it was, "Don't you look sweet?" It's just. It's so good. I mean, every other part of that too, down to Kira says the emissary will be happy to consider everything you say, and then Bajor's remittance will go forward unobstructed. Meaning he'll listen to everything you say, ignore it all, and then just go on anyhow. And then just all the other veiled insults of just everything.
I don't know if this is obviously. I guess this is not the same conversation. I don't know if you have it as the last clip, Matt, but I really like the conversation that she has with Kira at some point about how the terrorists weren't the only ones who had scars of the occupation.
That is the last clip, so let's hold off on discussing that until at that point. So that's one of those scenes where the Kira complex emotions in the previous clip is just great, like underwriting almost. You just let the actor kind of carry the scene with minimal performance and minimal words. This one, it's great super writing in that it's written perfectly with a ton of extra stuff written in there in between the lines. Just two nice little moments there. And because the third clip coming up is another Kira scene, she's one of those prime contenders for hidden MVP of an episode. You think this is a Ben Sisko story, but I'd argue this is a Kira story every bit as much, because she is an important scene stealer and an important decision maker, at the end in some of the big scenes as well.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a story of Bajor, and really Kira is the story of Bajor. Her journey as a character is that society's journey. So she's always sort of the every man or every woman, whatever you want to call it, for the Bajoran people.
Excellent point. So after those two just show teeth at each other the entire time, Cassidy arrives and visits Ben in the holosuite. They embrace, and Sisko leads a very passionate kiss, somewhat to the shock of Cassidy. She thought the meeting would have been a little bit more awkward, but again, Sisko is high as hell right now, essentially. They then immediately rush off in a runabout to Bajor, where Cisco then immediately finds the hidden city, which was lost for millennia. Commercial break.
Yeah, it's one of those tropes that you have to go with the fact that, I mean, they've apparently been searching for this for millennia and they couldn't find it, but this guy finds it in, what, a day and a half?
Well, he's got essentially gods and he's half a god himself.
Right.
That'll help on the search.
No, he's got God's compass, so yeah.
If you'll indulge me on one more Raiders of the Lost Ark reference, I really could have used more of a map room, Well of the Souls dramatic type moment for Cisco finding the location. Not sure how they would have pulled that off, but
Either that or they should have had a big boulder chase them to where the location is. But yeah, I mean, so the reconciliation with Cassidy is another important part of this episode, and I don't know. I don't think I've been on an episode with you, Dan, where you've talked about Cassidy before. But I mean, this is a relationship that I actually kind of like in Star Trek. I think it rings a lot more true than some of the other ones, and I was glad to see her back. I like that she's going to add that dynamic back into the show.
Yeah, and it was. I agree. I've always been a fan of Cassidy, and I also like that whether just by using the euphoric Cisco thing as a device, we completely blow over the typical, Vash comes into Picard's office and they have to have some awkward conversation about how she did wrong the last time she was here or some nonsense. And he just grabs her and kisses her and they're back. I mean, it was just great to just steamroll over all the nonsense.
Yeah. All that Maquis stuff is all water under the bridge now.
Yeah,
well, you can, the high stuff helps, but you could easily see how they were careful to make sure that she was delivering medicine and food supplies and all that kind of stuff. So it's not that big of a jump to let her get off the hook.
And she served her sentence, so she did her time.
Yeah. And he was borderline, committing treason with all the different things he was trying to do to let her off the hook or give her opportunities to get off the hook. In that episode. So, I mean, he obviously was in a bit of a gray area in terms of his morality versus his duty versus his feelings for her. So it's easy to imagine that 6 months later, him missing her all that time, he's all good to just move forward.
But before we move forward in the show, there's one point I want to go back. I love it when they do this through Star Trek a few times where they vaporize rock in these caverns. Does anybody else get worried about all the fumes those rocks will be putting off?
I worry about them touching
the edges. Yeah, that's going to be hot as hell on the edges too.
I'm always like, step carefully. Give it a foot.
I guess I'm the only one about the fumes.
I mean, I didn't think about fumes giving off anything, but I figured the rocks are disintegrated, so they're not giving off fumes. But I guess they'd be hot, so yeah.
Well, the rock's got to go somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Well, anywho, Act 3, we come back and what I'm sure was Blair's favorite scene of this episode, discussions of naval protocol and keel hauling. Anybody know what keel hauling is?
No.
Isn't it some kind of disciplinary thing?
Yeah, it's an old naval tradition. I think in the Dutch army, they used to do it as punishment. You basically take a guy, old sailboats, you put him on the deck, you tie a rope to him, you loop the rope under the ship from the left side to the right underneath, and then you drag his ass from over the deck, under the boat, under the keel, and then up over the other side. There would be all the barnacles and stuff that would literally cut you to pieces, potentially even decapitate you. And that's if they're dragging you quickly, but if they drag you slowly, you just drowned. So there's keel hauling for you.
Fun.
Oh, yeah. But let's move on to a little bit of a longer clip, and this is what Matt was discussing. It's Kira and Wynn discussing some history and some stuff to come.
Child, you and the emissary are close, are you not?
I consider Captain Cisco a friend.
So you know his mind, how he thinks, how he reacts in certain situations.
I'm not really sure what you're asking.
I'm asking if you think the emissary will forgive me.
Forgive you.
For doubting him. He must have been aware that I never truly believed he was the emissary.
I'm sure it crossed his mind.
Well, I was wrong. I know that now. Only someone touched by the prophets could have found Bahala.
Does that mean you're not going to try to block Bajor's admittance into the Federation?
I'm going to follow the path the emissary has laid out for us.
I must admit, I'm surprised to hear that. It takes a lot of courage to admit you're wrong.
And you think I lack courage?
I didn't say that.
But it is what you think. Those of you who were in the resistance, you're all the same. You think you're the only ones who fought the Cardassians. That you saved Bajor single-handedly. Perhaps you forget, Major. The Cardassians arrested any Bajoran found to be teaching the word of the prophets. I was in a Cardassian prison camp for 5 years. And I can remember each and every beating I suffered. And while you had your weapons to protect you, all I had was my faith and my courage. Walk with the prophets, child. I know I will.
So Matt, there's your scene.
I know, damn this episode for making me like feel the tiniest bit of sympathy for Kai Wynn, but somehow they managed to do it.
But it's interesting because in that very scene, it makes you kind of question how much she's still telling the truth, because it opens with her knowing which way the wind's blowing, and now she knows she has to align herself with Sisko, because if there was any doubt to him before, there's just none now, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, this is the first time, if you think about it, I'm trying to think back to all of her previous appearances on the show. And in those appearances, I don't think there was any time where something incontrovertible happened that showed that he has to be the emissary. So she could afford to be the reticent doubter from here on until this episode. And this is where things start to change for her a little bit.
Right. But so that's her showing that she's going to be a survivor and follow him. So it's showing that she is willing to go in any direction that saves her. So that's one thing that's established. And then it talks about her in prison camps, and we know they're not going to be good, but I wonder how much that first part implies. What was she doing in those prison camps to get by? How much was she, whispering in the ear of the Cardassians at the same time? And she's definitely going to use whatever did happen in there to her advantage now. She's manipulating Kira with it. So it makes me wonder, like, what was her experience genuinely like in there? I'm sure it was no picnic.
Right.
But,
and I don't know if she was entirely lying about being beaten. I believe that she was beaten on some occasions.
Sure, but that's just where nothing is beyond her to take advantage of and manipulate for her.
Oh, no, she's not beneath anything. No, certainly not.
Yeah, I mean, when she talks about having courage and faith, I never call into question her courage. She is somebody who takes risks, who will do whatever it takes, but always in a self-serving way. As far as her faith, I find her to be more of a person who has faith in herself and in her role to be a powerful person. And like you guys were saying, how does that translate to the occupation? Is she defiant to the Cardassians because she wants power amongst the Bajorans? If there's an opportunity to sell out a rival in a collaborative type manner with the Cardassians, does she take it? I would not put that beyond her.
Well, we see at the very end of the series, I mean, she works with Gul Dukat because aligning herself with the power race is going to give her more power, she thinks.
Right. Well, I mean, that's where she proves she actually has no faith, where it's like, oh, the prophets won't speak to me. So obviously
Screw
them. I mean, I'm the best. So if the power rates will talk to me, then they must be the real gods because I'm a godly person. But I mean, it is a great scene. The trigger was a little interesting because Kira says it takes a lot of courage to admit when you're wrong, and whereas the Kai takes it from you think I don't have courage, I think really the trigger was you are wrong. I think if Kira had not used that word, there never would have been this whole exchange. But the whole concept of clergy being courageous in the face of fascism or genocide or whatever, whether you go back to the Holocaust or what have you, is a real thing. And the concept that she played a part in that, possibly to the benefit of her people, is compelling. And like Matt was saying, makes her potentially a more sympathetic character until you think more about it and about what we know of her later.
But usually, like when we have Kai Wynn in an episode, she's always doing something antagonistic. She's always doing something shady. She's always doing something underhanded. And she might be in this episode, but dare I say it, this is the most morally neutral Kai Wynn episode that I've ever seen.
Up until the point she encourages Sisko to take these visions to the point of his death.
Well, yes.
So he's off the table for her. But yeah. But yes, to Dan's point, I think it's absolutely right that she got triggered from your admitting you were wrong, because we see it with politicians, people in power like her. There are the people that are truly wrong a bunch, but they will never admit it. And then when they get caught,
she does the typical politician thing. She redirects it to, "Oh, you don't think I'm courageous? Well, let me tell you how you're not courageous." Yeah,
it's a pivot. It's a redirect. I'm never wrong. But, I'm wrong a ton. But if I get caught on it, it's distraction, fight with something else. Put it back on Kira, because Kira leaves that scene guilty.
Yeah.
Feeling guilty, that is.
I mean, Kai Wynn just told her that she was fake news.
Exactly. So on Bajor, Sisko sits in Bahala contemplating as the excavations begin. Admiral Wiley arrives and is increasingly concerned over Sisko's role as this emissary, and he points out that there's plenty of work Federation-wise that still has to be done. Whatley admits that he is flat out scared of this path that Sisko is going down. Sisko agrees. But in the end, he's supportive and allows Sisko to continue with this stuff until the morning, where that's where the line is drawn and he needs to be back on the station for a full physical. And as he leaves, we see Sisko is struck by a bad headache. That next morning, Bashir and Whatley are pacing around sickbay, waiting for Sisko to arrive. And when he finally does, Sisko is in full-out religious leader mode, handing out vague prophecies to people he sees on the promenade, and even shows off this ability to Whatley himself as we go to commercial break.
Right, and this is where, I start to understand more of the Admiral side, because this is starting to get creepy. If I wasn't as versed with the Bajoran religion as like Sisko and the rest of the people on the station are, the fact that he's coming onto back on the station as if he's like Jesus walking on water, then yeah, this is getting a little weird.
Yeah, he's just short of laying on hands to heal people walking through the promenade.
And also, too, I want to point out something, and maybe we can get some mileage out of this. But starting with this episode for sure, this Bashir is the changeling. Did we all remember that? Because when they find Bashir in the prison camp later in this episode, he's wearing the Generations uniform.
Well, he's a pretty dang good doctor then. He does like neurosurgery on Sisko and does it perfectly.
He's well versed in the rules too. He wasn't just like, yeah, all right, I'll do the surgery. He's like, hold on, we have rules here. He specifically said he didn't want it, and now it falls to the closest family member. So he studied up.
Man, this is where
thorough.
Yeah, they're thorough, but why wouldn't he just take this opportunity to whoops, syringe slipped into his brain?
Because that would blow his cover.
It would not. They all say this is a very risky surgery. Yeah. You know, all this retconning stuff works to a point.
I know.
They've invested quite a bit in studying Captain Sisko, and DS9 is a very important piece of real estate in the Alpha Quadrant near the wormhole. So if suddenly they bring in, Captain Jellicoe to run the station, they got a whole new animal to deal with.
But it's destabilizing the Federation. The Bajorans would have taken this as a negative prophecy and maybe not have joined the Federation if their emissary died on the eve of signing it. Then the Federation's not at the mouth of the wormhole, destabilizing effect. You drop the ball, changelings, as far as I'm concerned. You drop the ball.
Well, obviously they're not perfect.
Well, obviously.
But I just thought it's interesting that, like, from here on until the episode where it's discovered, yeah, this is the changeling Bashir, whenever you see him in the first contact uniform.
That's a cool point.
But the, getting back to the sort of the Jesus walking amongst his people scene, it's a huge stepping stone for the character, maybe the biggest since Ascension, where in that moment, he is the emissary, arguably more than he is the captain, although he always maintains that role as well. In refusing to give up his visions and in disrupting the UFP induction ceremony, which we'll get to later, he's really sealing that deal that he is the emissary first. So that's a huge stepping stone for the character.
Well, he's no longer afraid of the role, which is very interesting. And he is changing lives at this point. I mean, it's starting to get a little strange because, I mean, he just walks up to some guy and makes him retire because he doesn't belong there, apparently.
Yeah, I always like this scene. I don't know. I'm not a religious person, but I do get a little emotional in this scene.
I like the scene. It's just, it's hitting the right point, the right emotion, but the emotion is oddness.
Yeah, it's oddness because it's emotional, because it's like one of the few points where there is a literal explanation and proof that this guy is having these visions and that this is true stuff because of aliens, basically. But it's creepy also because we see the same kind of a thing in Flim Flam men and cult leaders and stuff. So it's creepy because we see this as a very real thing when there isn't an alien that zaps future ideas in the people's heads. So
that's where I get freaked out. Like, that's why I'm not a religious person today. But in this environment where we're privy to all of his dealings with the prophets, and we know that there's substance there, then it's the scene that one of you guys mentioned where he walks up to the young guy and just says, like, "What are you doing here? Go home." It's so simple, and it's like, well, why can't he be here? What's going on at home? And it just sort of fires the imagination. It's just such a subtle way of going about this type of business, and I really like that.
And believe it or not, that character that he tells to go home becomes a major player in the DS9 books that occur post-series. He becomes a Vedic.
Oh dear, this is like getting into like Star Wars expanded universe action figure names and kind of stuff.
He's actually an interesting character, but I mean, that's what happens to him. He becomes a Vedic.
What's his name?
I think it's Yevir, Yevir.
Yeah, I skip over a lot of the DS9 books. They seem very mired in odd continuity and stuff.
I actually like them quite a bit, but that's just, personal preference.
So, speaking of continuity and foreshadowing, in Act 4, on the bed in the infirmary, Sisko says he saw a vision of a cloud over Bajor. That was a cloud of locusts. And they turn and head off to Cardassia. And then Bashir drops the bomb that Sisko's brain is basically coming apart. He can fix it, but at the cost of these visions. They'll stop. And Sisko will die if they don't do these surgeries. Most likely. Sisko elects to continue with the visions. And then he's off to meet with Jake and Cassidy. And they are both quite angry with him, pointing out that all this vision stuff is, frankly, rather selfish. And they beg him to reconsider. But just then, Wynn, of all people, arrives and says that she will guide him through his vision journeys.
And Jake's the smartest person in this room. He says, after everything you've said, you're trusting her?
Oh, and I love he does not bother to like lower his voice. She's standing right there, and he's like, "Seriously, her? Good on him."
No,
You
I
know,
think I have to admit I'm kind of on Cassidy and Jake's side in this moment. He is starting to take it to a selfish route, I think.
yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I guess it depends how you want to define the selfishness of it, because the way they see it is like, hey, we're your family and you're ignoring us and just doing this thing that you want to do. But the thing that he wants to do is to cradle the universe in his arms like an infant and like fix it. So what could be more selfless than doing that, to sacrifice
But
himself for the greater good?
but that's not necessarily how it's being portrayed as happening. The moment he understands everything is going to be the moment he dies, and it slips away from him. He won't be able to do anything once he understands it, because that's the point where he'll just die. So it's nicely constructed in that it does show that it is just selfish. Yeah, he will selfishly understand everything and then just die and not be able to save anything. So it's just for his own gratification at a point. And they don't really say that, but that is the implications of they're like, this is just
Well, I
selfish.
mean, that's one interpretation. It's never stated definitively, like in the very moment that the captain learns everything there is to know, he will die. I mean, he could die the next day.
No, but it's all speculation. But it's points that I think are equally valid, and kind of what I like in this episode. It might be a throwaway scene to you guys, but I kind of like the, should we call it CNN-esque debate that happens in ops?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's sort of the human science view versus the alien faith view, with Kira and Worf playing their parts and Dax and O'Brien playing their parts, to kind of give you each side of the argument from kind of a Greek chorus sort of perspective.
Right. And the religious angle would be, yeah, he might die, but he's going to transcend into something else. And he might very
which is true by the end of the series.
Yeah.
But we don't know that now. And Jake is not, thinking that either. And
Right.
what small comfort is that? We see the lengths he'll go to save his father. It's not going to be any comfort to him say, well, he's going to transition into some ethereal thing that may or may not help anybody, but he'll understand stuff.
Right.
So the implication is, right, he's coming closer and closer to touching the prophet's temporal understanding. He'll see everything backwards and forwards is where he's transitioning to, right?
Mm-hmm. Pure omnipotence, yeah.
Right. So Wynn takes Sisko to see an orb, the orb of prophecy. And now he's in a lot of pain. And Wynn flat out wonders and confronts him, do you think you'll be able to do this? It's very draining. But Sisko insists.
Like she would know, because we find out that Prophet's never spoken to her.
Yeah, she must sit in front of that thing for hours and just nothing happens. So she leaves him to the orb and she heads off to the signing ceremony. And Sisko is very late to arrive. And they decide, well, you know what? We're just going to go on without him. But just then, Sisko barges in and is barely able to stand. And he just screams that Bajor cannot join the Federation or it will be destroyed. And then promptly collapses to the floor. Commercial break.
Yeah, it's your typical 90s big reveal and then commercial.
So is anybody else a little bummed that we don't ever actually see the visions that Sisko is seeing?
But I don't know how you would show that necessarily, because, whenever I think of a cloud of locusts, sadly, my mind goes to Exorcist 2, and I don't want to see any of that in Star Trek.
The way you would do it, it's the exact kind of thing that Babylon 5 could do, because they were all in on early CGI. It doesn't look good, but they could show a few other things that shows like this might not. So there would be ways, but it would be jarring. It wouldn't work all that good.
But oddly enough, the next time he has a problem very similar to this, they actually mention that it's a similar problem. We do get to see the visions, because that's the Far Beyond the Stars episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's more powerful just to have his reactions to them, that that they transcend human understanding, and that he's at this heightened
Plus,
place of understanding that we can't go to with him.
Plus, I mean, things have come true that he's seen before, but at the same time, by not seeing the visions, I feel like it leaves it a little bit more ambiguous whether or not you think he's right or not. I don't know. It's more suspenseful that way.
Right. I mean, ultimately, it would be kind of like probably a trippy prophet's vision type scenario, but I am a big fan of TV shows where they do trippy crap, weird imagery that, you know, is not necessarily immediately understandable but pays off. It would have been kind of neat to see it, but ultimately, yeah, we don't necessarily need to see it.
And we sort of do get that later. I mean, the whole when he's in the wormhole convincing them not to let the Dominion through is a lot of that.
Right.
I mean, and the whole locusts, you know, flying over Bajor, obviously the Jem'Hadar fleet, and the ships even look like bugs. You know what I mean? So it's pretty clear imagery, especially in hindsight, that of what he's describing.
Well, should I bring it home in Act 5?
Please do.
In the med bay, the Admiral and Kira argue about going ahead with this vision-sacrificing but life-saving surgery. Kira says no, it was the wishes of the emissary to save the visions. The Admiral says, yes, they must go ahead with it. The priority is his life. But it isn't their decision to make. Bashir points out that this is all on Jake. And Jake wants to save his dad's life. The surgery goes on, and in a nice touch, like I said, Cassidy and the Admiral both comfort Jake very quietly as they leave the room and his dad enters surgery. Now, near the temple, Wynn and Kira further discuss the situation. Basically, Wynn is disappointed that Jake decided to save his dad's life. Again, wouldn't it have been so much more convenient for her to have Sisko just die?
Right. And then, you know, admirably, what I like about Kira is that, yeah, she was fighting for him to not have the surgery, but once Jake makes that decision, you know, you could tell in her conversation, she has no animosity about it. She understood.
Right. She's not looking at this as a strictly right or wrong thing. It's complex, and she's just trying to respect the wishes of somebody, but it's respecting the wishes of somebody who's definitely altered. Right. I mean, I kind of jokingly mentioned that he's high, but
yeah, he's not in his right mind, obviously. Right. But he says that, I mean, I like that she says, you know, he decided that he needed his father to win.
Right. And then when blah, blah, blah says some stuff about hoping that the prophets can forgive him, which is some real nice religious guilt tripping crap that, you know, we find out she's not even religious, but man, that's just low blow crap.
I know. I mean, like, they did a fine job of building some sympathy, but then she reminded me of just what a person she is by the end.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. But in other news, she mentions that the Bajorans have decided on holding off joining the Federation due to the emissary's prophecies of doom. Soon after, Sisko awakes from surgery. He's healthy, but he is horrified and distraught over losing these visions. And now healthy again, he's in his office, and then joined by Watley, who tries to convince Sisko to reevaluate this whole situation and try to get Bajor back on board to joining the Federation. But Ben is having none of that. He's absolutely convinced these visions were rock solid to him. You know, it's all this stuff about avoiding that, you know, pesky upcoming war. They really just dropped the Dominion War. He just states it as a fact is coming up, which is kind of neat. They're not even hiding that that's where the show's going.
Right, the coming war with the Dominion.
Right.
Well, I mean, it's a good thing they held off, though, because, I mean, the first place to invade is right there.
Absolutely. And Watley points out that he rightfully and probably should have Sisko's head for all this. But dang it, he is just too tied up in this Bajoran mess as their religious leader for him to do it. They're past the point. But they agree that someday the Federation will absorb Bajor. And then finally, in the end, Ben and Jake, and now Cassidy, are all in the quarters about to enjoy dinner. She points out that, sure, he lost something important, but getting rid of that saved something just as important. And break to closing credits.
See, this is why I like Cassidy's, because I feel like she's a real genuine character who is not trying to. She doesn't dismiss Cisco's feelings as being the emissary of the prophet. She doesn't try to belittle them. She just tries to maintain, the balance as this, companion figure to this Messiah, which is something that has to put a lot of pressure on her. So I like the way she handles it. I like her integrating into this family.
Yeah, I mean, what can I say? She's just nice. She's a very nice person and a delight to have around, and you kind of root for them. Well, I do.
I do too.
Yeah, you root for them as a couple, and Jake likes her, and I don't know, I'm a sucker for just the father and son looking for a new mother figure, and she is a great fit for that role.
I mean, better her than Mirror Jennifer.
What a monster. She was a monster.
She loves baseball. She loves Creole cooking. I mean, what else do you need?
Yes, and she's just great. And it's an end to a very, very complex episode. I feel kind of like when I watch this, I feel kind of like Kira in the bar scene, where like I have very complex feelings about this episode. But I'm interested to see what you guys think. So we'll go into final thoughts and ratings. Dan, your final thoughts and 5-star ratings for Rapture.
All right. So as I was mentioning before, I think the episode is a huge stepping stone on the Ben Sisko journey. As we were saying, it lays the groundwork for the coming Dominion War arc and ends up setting up Bajor's survival in it, kind of unbeknownst to us at this point. There's no distracting B-plot, and the episode really serves as an excellent commentary on loyalty or allegiance to the state or to the family, to faith, to self, and how they all intertwine. And at the same time, every character exercises valid points of view, even when. I did find the Admiral to be a bit of a dumbass, as I said earlier, but what else is new? And I recognize the good points about him that you guys mentioned. But my opinion aside, I'm not going to let it tarnish this one for me. And I'm giving it a full 5 out of 5.
Nice. Really like this one. So, Matt, you're next.
I just want to point out that we talk about all the extra, the actual details in this episode that were really good. The nice nuance and writing, performance, all that kind of stuff. But really, the best part of this episode is the fact that it's ultimately paid off. They do a prophecy episode, and over the next 2.5 seasons, we see this paid off. So one of the best selling points of this episode is not even the episode itself. It's the setup and then season-long payoff going to the end of season 7. So that's really cool. Really happy with that. So going through it, kind of the initial watch, I was very much thinking, this is a very strong 3-star episode, but our talk, it's one of those ones where I'm happy to have my score pushed in one direction or another. And because talking through it brought out even the stronger points that little bit more, this is a very nice 4-star episode for me.
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo you almost completely. This was an episode that I kind of felt not iffy on, but it's a very complex episode. There are things that I enjoyed about it. There are things that I wasn't terribly pleased by, but ultimately it's an episode that really evolves the universe and is very interesting. There's a lot of thought. There's a lot of emotion that goes into it. And I kind of like the characterization of it's not just a Sisko episode. It's really kind of a Kira episode. And I never thought of it that way. But you're absolutely right. And I kind of like it for that. So I think it's a solid little episode, and I'm also going to give it 4 stars. And so, I mean, I'm glad we had this conversation because I was fluctuating, I think, somewhere in the 3 to 4 territory like you were, Matt, and I ended up going with the 4.
Yeah, I mean, there's the episodes that hit you right off the bat as, oh, this is good. I want to watch it right away. And then there's the episodes that you put on and let it kind of simmer, and if you work through it, you kind of realize, there's a little bit more there than met the eye off the bat. And I think this certainly, fits that bill.
For sure. Well, now we're going to go into our feedback section. And as always, thank you so much for your feedback. We really do appreciate hearing from you. There are a number of different ways to get a hold of us. You can reach us through email at up2podcast@gmail.com. You can leave a comment in our forums at forum.checkmatefamily.com. You can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/upperpylon2. Follow us on Twitter at UP2 podcast. And 5-star iTunes reviews. They really do help out the show and get the word out there as we continue on into season 5, as we get closer and closer to the prophesized Dominion War. So we really do appreciate those. And finally, you can reach all of us individually on Twitter. I'm at mhansen0207, HANSEN, talking about all things Star Trek, all things science fiction, comic book movies. If you saw the new Spider-Man movie, come talk about it there with me, and so much more.
I can be found at ProSub0, where I've been reading, or I have read, Welcome to Night Vale, the novel, and then listening to a ton of the episodes of the podcast, Welcome to Night Vale. The book is pretty good, and I'm not sure I like the podcast yet. I'm listening to a ton of it, so let me know. Is this podcast good? Should I be enjoying it? It's very complex. I don't know.
And I can be found on Twitter at dlevitt79, DLEVITT79. I talk about all manner of shit. I don't know. But if any of it interests you, drop a comment. I will reply, and we can have discourse.
And hopefully 10 Forward resurrects soon enough.
Yeah, we're on a bit of a hiatus right now on 10 Forward, which you can follow at 10 Forward 1701. I am hoping to record a show in the very near future, which will hopefully release not too long thereafter. But the bar is it hasn't burned to the ground or anything. It's locked up at the moment, but could be unlocked at any moment, and the drinks could start pouring again. So just keep an eye open. We may surprise you.
Well, I definitely look forward to that. Thank you so much, Dan, not only for joining us, but for all of you listening for joining us on our discussion on Rapture. It was a very, very complex, interesting, thoughtful one. And I look forward to next week when it's one of my favorite episodes because it's very slasher-esque, the revenge story of the darkness and the light.
That is good.
I'm Matt in Buffalo, and you will ride eternal, shiny and chrome.
And this is Dan from Long Island.
And this is Matt from Arizona. Closing hailing frequencies. Docking clamps are open, and you are cleared for departure.